Newly released video appears to show U.S. police officers beating a man who later died. Financial Secretary Paul Chan signals a change in fiscal policy for the coming budget. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. In the U.S., shocking video footage was released by Memphis authorities on how a young man appeared to be beaten by police officers. 29-year-old Tyre Nichols died 3 days later, and 5 officers have since been dismissed, arrested and charged with secondary murder. We'd like to warn you that some scenes may be disturbing. Nazvi Karim reports.
It came with warnings about the shocking nature of the video.
Damn, I didn't do anything.
Such was the brutality with which Tyre Nichols was beaten on the night of January 7th, as seen in footage released by Memphis authorities. 5 former police officers have been arrested and charged with second-degree murder, with more charges expected to be laid against them. The video shows Nichols, a 29-year-old FedEx worker and father of a 4-year-old son, being repeatedly struck by fists, boots and batons for 3 minutes as he screamed for his mother.
Mom!
Nichols died from his injuries 3 days later in hospital. Also under investigation are 2 paramedics who are alleged to have delayed administering emergency aid. On the night, Nichols was pulled over by police for alleged reckless driving. He is heard saying, "I didn't do anything," after being pulled from his car. He is wrestled to the ground. An officer says, "Tase him." "I'm just trying to go home," Nichols says. An officer fires a taser at him. They beat him with a baton and kick him and punch him. 2 officers hold Nichols to the ground and another appears to kick him in the head. A 4th officer is seen hitting Nichols with a baton 3 times. Officers are seen fist bumping each other and celebrating.
For a mother to know that their child was calling them in their need, and I wasn't there for him. Do you know how I feel right now? Because I wasn't there for my son. But for me to find out that my son was calling my name, and I was only feet away, and did not even hear him. You have no clue how I feel right now. No clue.
U.S. President Joe Biden said he spoke to Nichols' mother and vowed to pursue the George Floyd Act in Congress to revamp policing in the country.
What's at stake is, first of all, innocent people's lives, number one. Number 2, it has a lot to say and do with the image of America. It has a lot to do with whether or not we are the country we say we are, that we're a country of law and order.
As an avid skateboarder, this is where Nichols liked to spend his time. He was remembered as a kind-hearted son and father who would light up a room when he walked in.
He just had an ease about him. He would kind of just float in and around a lot of different people, and he was kind-hearted and really just a joy to be around.
You know, my son had a lot of older guys he would look up to as a young kid trying to be a great skateboarder, and Tyre was one of those guys. It's just hard to, this is way too young.
Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
Authorities across the United States have appealed for calm after video footage of the Tyre Nichols beating was released. Vigils and protests were held in Memphis in Tennessee, where Nichols lived, as well as other cities, including New York and Washington. Nichols' mother also appealed for calm, as did the mayor of New York, Eric Adams.
It would trigger pain and sadness in many of us. It would make us angry. My message to New Yorkers is to respect the wishes of Mr. Nichols' mother. If you need to express your anger and outrage, do so peacefully. My message to the NYPD has been, and will continue to be, to exercise restraint.
The protests were largely peaceful. In Memphis, Nichols' mother and stepfather were joined by several dozen supporters on a cold night for a candlelight vigil and prayer service for the victim. They gathered at Toby's skate park, where Nichols enjoyed skateboarding before taking to the streets. In New York, hundreds of protesters took to the streets to demand justice for Nichols and a stop to police brutality. In Washington, D.C., protesters demanded jail for the killers. Back locally, Financial Secretary Paul Chan said he will adopt a centralist and slightly loose fiscal policy for the upcoming budget set to be delivered next month. But Chan did not give a clear answer on whether the government will hand out electronic consumption vouchers this year. On February 22nd, Financial Secretary Paul Chan will deliver a new budget in the Legislative Council. Speaking at a consultation session today, he noted that as the pandemic is easing and cross-border travel has resumed, the city's economy is gradually picking up. Still, he said the speed and strength of the recovery are uncertain. Chan said over the past few years during the pandemic, expansionary fiscal policies were put in place to stabilize the city's economy. But he said that direction is going to change this year to a centralist and slightly loose fiscal policy. He added the government has spent over a few $100 billion over the past few years. During today's consultation session, some residents raised concerns about the electronic consumption vouchers. One resident suggested the government issue vouchers that target families with children. But this woman disagrees, saying authorities should save the money and place it in the future fund. Others also raised issues such as tax deduction for foreign domestic helpers and property vacancy tax. The financial secretary said there's yet to be a definitive answer as to how these policies should be set out. Chan said voices in the society will be heard and the administration will closely monitor the situation. Hong Kong reported 3,480 positive COVID cases today, an increase from yesterday. Among the new cases, 118 were imported. 33 more patients succumbed to the virus. Meanwhile, Professor Wallace Lau, a government health advisor, said it's possible that residents will need annual vaccination in future, but he expressed reservations about this to start an independent inquiry about the government's handling of the COVID pandemic. Earlier, another advisor to the government, Professor Yuen Kwok Yung, suggested the establishment of an independent investigation committee to examine the deficiencies of the government's response to COVID. Lau said the pandemic did not just happen in Hong Kong, but across the world. And while it is important to review the past, he does not think forming a special investigation panel is needed now. 7 people were found guilty of rioting outside the Tsim Sha Tsui police station in 2019. They were sentenced to jail times of between 36 and 45 months. In August 2019, a group of protesters gathered on Nathan Road and hurled petrol bombs at Tsim Sha Tsui police station, burning the lower limbs of an officer. One of the defendants who admitted his wrongdoing had his jail sentence reduced to 3 years. One defendant cleared of his charge of rioting, but found guilty of possessing offensive weapons, was sentenced to 11 months behind bars. Others received jail sentences of between 42 and 45 months. The judge noted the defendants knew there was a protest at the time, but intentionally stayed there to drum up support for the protesters, which constituted taking part in a riot. The U.S. had earlier demanded that Hong Kong products should be labelled Made in China. World Trade Organization subsequently ruled such a demand is against the WTO rules. The U.S. has now lodged an appeal. Beijing called Washington a bully. China's ambassador to the WTO, Li Chenggang, said during a WTO meeting on Friday that this behavior has clearly depicted an image of the U.S. as a unilateral bully, a rule breaker, and a supply chain interrupter. The United States, meanwhile, accused Beijing of imposing illegal unilateral retaliatory measures on U.S. exports. Washington added a WTO that shields China's non-market policies and practices is not in anyone's interests. Still ahead on tonight's news. Footage of attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband is released. 7 people killed in Jerusalem in shooting attack. The Holocaust is remembered globally, including through a Broadway play. Welcome back to TVB News. A fire at an industrial building in Sanpo Kong has been burning for 13 hours since early this morning. A man felt unwell and was sent to Queen Elizabeth Hospital for treatment, while 2 people felt sick due to smoke inhalation as a result of the number 3 alarm blaze. Mimo Singhai reports.
Thick black smoke could be seen from afar as the sound of an explosion was heard. This was the scene of the fire at the Wing Hang factory building in Choi Hung Road this morning. The building is 14 stories high, and its exterior was undergoing refurbishment with scaffolding and linoleum mesh put up. According to the Fire Services Department, the blaze broke out on the 9th floor at 5:17 a.m. and was upgraded to a number 3 alarm at 8:53 a.m. The department deployed 4 jets and 3 briefing apparatus teams to fight the fire after sending 2 jets and 2 briefing teams earlier in the morning. A multi-rotor drone was also used to assist the operation. A man felt unwell and was sent to Queen Elizabeth Hospital for treatment, while 2 people felt sick due to smoke inhalation. This woman said she was on the 8th floor when the fire began, but there was not much smoke. 10 minutes later, she left the building after catching a glimpse of the blaze. Meanwhile, this woman who works on the premises said she thought the factory building has sufficient fire safety equipment. The fire weakened for a while at noon, but flames reappeared afterwards, spreading to the scaffolding, some of which was burned before falling off. The factory building is over 50 years old. The fire department reminded the public to remain calm and close their windows and doors to block any unusual smells stemming from the blaze. Mimo Singhai, TVB News.
Overseas, video released publicly for the first time shows the husband of former U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi fighting with his assailant before being struck on the head. Paul Pelosi suffered head injuries after allegedly being attacked by David DePape in their home in San Francisco late last year. Nasvi Kareem reports.
This is San Francisco Police. Do you need help?
Paul Pelosi, husband of former U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, dials 911 after an intruder breaks into their San Francisco home on October 28th last year.
Oh, well, there's a gentleman here just waiting for my wife to come back. Nancy Pelosi.
Okay, do you need police, fire, or medical for anything?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Is the Capitol Police around? They usually protect my wife. They're usually here at the house.
Hi, how you doing?
How are you?
What's going on, man?
Video footage and 911 recordings of the night Paul Pelosi was attacked was released by authorities after a coalition of news agencies successfully gained access to the evidence that prosecutors played in court last month. A state court judge ruled there was no reason to keep the video secret. It showed 82-year-old Paul Pelosi struggling with his assailant, David DePape, for control of a hammer moments before he was struck on the head. Police body camera footage shows DePape wrest the tool from Pelosi and lunged towards him with the weapon over his head. DePape, 43, has pleaded not guilty in state and federal cases and is jailed without bail. He faces charges including attempted murder, elder abuse, and assaulting an immediate family member of a federal official. Nancy Pelosi said her husband is making progress and thanked those who asked about his well-being.
I have not seen the break-in, and I have absolutely no intention of seeing the deadly assault on my husband's life. I won't be making any more statements about this case.
Members of Congress have faced a sharp rise in threats in the 2 years since the January 6, 2021 insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. The U.S. Capitol Police say they have investigated nearly 10,000 threats to members last year, more than twice the number from 4 years earlier. Nasvi Kareem, TVB News.
In Israel, a gunman killed at least 7 people and wounded 10 others in a synagogue on the outskirts of Jerusalem on Friday. Police said the gunman arrived at around 8:15 p.m. and opened fire, hitting a number of people before he was killed by police. Israeli media said the gunman was a Palestinian resident of East Jerusalem. The attack, which police described as a terrorist incident, underlined fears of an escalation in violence after months of clashes in the West Bank, culminating in a raid on Thursday that killed at least 9 Palestinians. There was no initial claim of responsibility for the synagogue attack, which took place as worshippers attended Sabbath services on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Friday was the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Nazi Germany's Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. Events were held around the world to mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Daniel Rell tells us more.
In a speech on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres warned about the dangers posed by the continued presence of anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination and hatred globally.
Anti-Semitism is at record highs. And what is true for anti-Semitism is true for other forms of hate. Racism, anti-Muslim bigotry, xenophobia, homophobia, misogyny. Neo-Nazi, white supremacist movements are becoming more dangerous by the day. In fact, they now represent the #1 internal security threat in several countries.
Auschwitz-Birkenau, the former Nazi concentration and extermination camp, is located in the town of Ostwice in southern Poland, which was under the occupation of German forces during World War II. Auschwitz became a place of systematic murder of Jews, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, Roma and others targeted for elimination by Adolf Hitler. In all, some 1.1 million people were killed at the vast complex before it was liberated by Soviet troops on January 27, 1945. Today, the site, with its barracks and barbed wire and the ruins of gas chambers, stands as one of the world's most recognized symbols of evil. The director of the Auschwitz Memorial compared the deaths of innocent people in Ukraine to the suffering caused by World War II. Jewish and Christian prayers for the dead were recited at the memorial on Friday to mark International Holocaust Remembrance Day, as other commemorations got underway around the world. A survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau spoke at a special session in Germany's parliament, as Chancellor Olaf Scholz said the suffering of 6 million murdered Jews remains unforgotten, as does the suffering of the survivors. Ukraine's president took part in a ceremony in Kyiv to commemorate the victims of the Holocaust. Volodymyr Zelensky visited the Menorah Memorial at the Babin Yar National Historical and Memorial Reserve. Russia's chief rabbi Beryl Lazar called for peace everywhere forever at an event in Moscow. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delivered a speech at a Holocaust remembrance event in Ottawa.
It is more important than ever that we hear, tell, and remember the stories. It should be troubling for us all that so many young people haven't heard or don't understand what happened during the Holocaust.
In Britain, candles were lit in homes and public buildings, including Buckingham Palace, to remember victims of genocide. Daniel Rell, TVB News.
The Holocaust is also remembered by the performing arts. In New York, a Broadway show is honoring the 6 million Jews and millions of other victims killed by the Nazis. This report from NBC News.
You're not looking!
The Holocaust is not on your mind during the opening scenes of Leopoldstadt.
It's a beautiful star, darling, but it's not the star we put at the top of our Christmas tree.
This view of a wealthy, seemingly assimilated Jewish family in Vienna of 1899 is alluring, with a gravely important purpose: to make the people on stage real.
It turned out that assimilation was meaningless. You were still a Jew and you were treated like any other Jew, up to the point of being murdered.
Leopoldstadt is a reference to the Jewish sector of the city that people on stage have left behind. But then, as now, anti-Semitism rises from its apparent slumber.
It's happening more and more with each headline. So the necessity of doing this play is deeply felt.
The world tried to avert its attention from the Holocaust and the 6 million Jews killed. The number, 6 million, is unfathomable, but this play helps make that number real.
Yes, there was the ultimate horror, but what came before that and what makes it tragic, what makes it horrific, is that these were people with lives.
The play is a hit, a tough ticket, and a not-so-gentle reminder.
This is the promised land!
The people with red eyes and wet cheeks that I see outside the theater are, yes, family of survivors, survivors themselves, Jews, but more than that, it's non-Jews who say, I had no idea. I had no idea.
Those who cannot remember history are condemned to repeat it. Harry Smith, NBC News, New York.
In New Zealand, authorities said 3 people had died and at least 1 was missing after record levels of rainfall pounded its largest city. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins flew to Auckland on a military plane after a state of emergency was declared in the region. He said the city was in for a big cleanup and that people should remain indoors if possible. Friday was the wettest day ever recorded in Auckland. And that's the news. Thanks for watching.